Hello, back again, talking logistics. As we said previously, there was a short episode which talked about traveling by sea, and then another short episode about traveling by land or over or across land. And now I think we can just finish with talking about air travel, which, of course, over the years we know has revolutionized or been revolutionized. I go back to the mid 60s or the early 60s when I used to cross the Atlantic. Aircraft didn't actually make the crossing from London to New York, well, perhaps to New York, but they couldn't make it to Caracas in Venezuela. They had to touch down, refuel in the Caribbean, and then fly on. We are talking, of course, a number of years ago, because here we are in 2021 and I'm going back to the mid 60s, so it's 40 odd years ago. Uh, I think the biggest thing that changed air travel was actually, or has actually been, what one might best define as low cost travel or low cost flying. Be it with the tour operators who all run packages. It's a bit like going back to Thompson's Holidays and other names which now don't come to me, but basically package tour, all in, inclusive holiday packages, which included the flight, the hotel booking, and maybe fly and drive, and therefore a car rental at the other end, wherever your destination was. It certainly, excuse me, revolutionized, because of course the prices were rock bottom compared to the average commercial or passenger flight, which we were accustomed to previously with all the major airlines. British Airways, Alitalia, KLM, Iberia, the Spanish airline, Sabena, the Belgium airline, Air France. What's the one in Germany? You'll all remember it, of course, Lufthansa, or Air Portugal, or other such names. They were all the national airlines. Alitalia, needless to say, unfortunately made a fundamental, critical, fatal mistake. But of course, it was a strategic mistake which they had no idea that it could possibly have ever happened, which was coincidentally with when low-cost flying started up with the airlines we know well, EasyJet, Ryanair, and others. It just coincided with that exact moment when Alitalia decided to change their business model. They said, we have not too many aircraft, but too many different models, different types of aircraft. First thing. Second thing, they said, I think it's the right moment to cut intercontinental flights. And that was the recipe for disaster. Because, of course, thereafter it meant that they only did either European or internal domestic flights. But, of course, what was the result? They were competing with the low-cost airlines, and this led Alitalia into, as we know, the rest is history. It's a very comfortable way of traveling. It's very quick. We get amazingly efficient aircraft now. They are highly polluting. We know. I cannot quote the carbon emissions and the black footprint for a short flight from London to New York of 5 hours, but I can guarantee you it is extreme. And all this talk about planting a tree which will solve the pollution, and which is, of course, created by the emissions, the CO2 emissions of the aircraft, is a bit of a myth, to be honest. But it is a comfortable way of flying. We're not talking, by the way, the Concorde, which was a one-off, and it was a joint venture between the French and the British company. I can't remember now the number of models, the actual number of aircraft that they had. I think it was 6 or 7, perhaps, maybe more. It was a supersonic aircraft. It flew at 30,000 meters, and the average aircraft flies at 10,000 meters. Can you believe it? It traveled at 900 kilometers an hour, and when it went through the sound barrier, there was an enormous bang. But can you believe it? People used to fly from London to New York and arrive in New York before they'd left London. Now, how could they have done that? Well, I'll tell you how they did it. Because the flight was extremely fast. The average aircraft flies at 10,000 meters and at about 600 kilometers an hour. And then there's the time difference. New York is 5 hours behind Greenwich Mean Time, and therefore they have that advantage. So with the speed of the flight and with the 5-hour, 6-hour time difference, it was an extremely efficient way of traveling. But sadly, the Concorde had to be laid off. There was a fatal accident when a piece of the engine ended up in the engine, and there was a terrible accident with a terrible fire, and sadly the Concordes were all put out of service. Coming back to air travel in general, I would say it's a very efficient way. We must remind and remember that, of course, we're not only talking passengers. There is an enormous amount of cargo. It is expensive. It's much more expensive to carry cargo by air than it is by sea. But there are, on occasions, or there is, cargo that has to be delivered rather more quickly, and therefore it travels by air. It is, as I say, much more expensive, but it is used unless, for some reason, I remember some years ago, I was visiting a company that made small electronic magnetic parts, little components, tiny little components. And the chap I was talking to in this company said, we cannot ship or send our products to wherever they were sending them by air because they were magnetic. And of course, the magnets or the magnetism in some way interfered with either the aircraft instruments, or worse than that, they actually, can you imagine, got in some way attached in a magnetic form to the fuselage of the aircraft, which on a cargo aircraft is, of course, quite bare, and more or less it's just you throw in boxes and crates and cartons and goodness knows what. They're quite bulky, quite big aircraft, sometimes very, very heavy, and big C-130s. They are used to carry big machinery, yes, of course, but it is expensive. And in general, big, heavy machinery and goods and freight like that does not travel by air. Smaller things can travel by air. If they want instant, if we're talking food, which is perishable, then it might be coming from South America. And if we want our grapefruits, or if we want our pineapples from Mr. Del Monte, arriving from Chile or Argentina, or our bananas coming from Ecuador. If we have to wait for them to arrive by sea, then it would take, goodness knows how long, 2 or 3 months, 2 months certainly. So they come by air, which of course means that they're rather expensive when they arrive at their destination. I think, having said that, we've pretty well covered most points on that front. So for the moment, I'll just leave you with that food for thought. And thank you, everybody. We will be on to the next episode very soon, and we will be discussing, I believe it'll be fashion and apparel. So, thank you.